Welcome to the Dr. DigiPol Show. My name is Alan Rosenblatt, aka Dr. DigiPol, and we are here to have a conversation about the latest in politics, digital politics, social media, and we have a really special guest with us today. We have with us Heather Booth. Heather is a longtime strategist for the Progressive Issue campaigns. Really just somebody everybody looks to for advice in this business. So I'm really excited to have her here. Lately, she has been working on Keith Ellison's campaign to be the DNC chair, and prior to that was working very closely with the Hillary Clinton campaign. Heather, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Great today. How are you? I'm ready for the resistance and for organizing.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. The resistance has been really getting a lot of momentum going. It's nice to see all the people turning out to protest, people actively engaging on social media with lots and lots of information and lots of challenges to the Trump administration. And I understand you're in the thick of all that, aren't you?
Well, I've dedicated my life to building a better society and working with movements for social change. And we're now seeing an explosion of such a movement for democracy and justice. We need to keep it on.
Yeah. What do you before we get into some of the things you've been doing, what are your thoughts about the potential for sustaining what we're seeing here? Is this something that is sustainable? Is there a trick to sustaining it, or do you think that there is just a natural motivation going on here that it's going to be able to keep itself going?
There's nothing natural in the sense of automatic or by nature itself. And as Dr. King had said, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice, but it only bends when we put our hands into it, our heads into it, our hearts into it, and when we bend it. And right now there is an outpouring of outrage and a move of people, many of whom were never active before, to say we need to do something to really organize, show our resistance to the
Right.
policies going on now, the destruction of the environment, the destruction of the democracy itself. We understand they're considering rules even to limit, if not ban, protests themselves, as well as the damage that's likely to be done to women's reproductive health programs, environmental programs, to people's standard of living and wages. So there's a whole host of issues on which there's resistance. What I do think we need to do now is to take both the resistance and the energy and move it on to deeper organizing so that we move this into states, building state power and also that national power. And I think that's what brings us to a key discussion about the Democratic Party, because it is one part of an infrastructure
Right.
that we can engage and if put to use of the movement for change now, can make quite a difference.
So let's talk a little bit about the Democratic National Committee, the election that we just had for chair of the Democratic National Committee, which Tom Perez won, and then immediately appointed Keith Ellison as the deputy chair. You worked with Keith Ellison on his campaign. Why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about who votes in these elections and what was the nature of the campaign? Were you reaching out directly to the people who could vote, or were you reaching out to the population of Democrats to provide groundswell for that? What combination of that? And your thoughts on sort of the whole election process itself.
Sure. And then I'll also tell you a little about Keith. But for the Democratic Party, there are 447 members who make up the Democratic National Committee. They're selected either by the primary voters in the Democratic Party, or they're selected by the state party operations, and they're generally apportioned by population. as well as some key constituencies within the Democratic Party are represented. And the Democratic Party's function is to help win elections at every level, local and national, raise funds for that, provide the background and resources to support people in that overall effort. But the people who vote for the chair are the members of the Democratic National Committee. Keith Ellison was running for chair because of Keith's enormous commitment to building a progressive movement. Keith is now, as many people know, a longtime congressman from Minnesota, and he's also co-chair of the Progressive Caucus. So he's been there on every progressive issue for years, and before he even was in Congress, he was working for civil rights and social justice issues. On the issues, he had also built a political operation in his district that moved it from the lowest performing in Minnesota into the highest performing in Minnesota, and perhaps the highest performing in the country. And in a state that at one point seemed to be turning from blue to red because of what he did in his district. It meant that the governor and the senator, Al Franken, in a very close election, became Democratic because of the increased turnout in his district. And so Keith wanted to take the political experience that he has in building a field operation that's deep and engaging of people, and working on the issues and combining the issues and the politics, the policy and the politics, and driving forward. And he thought he could take that into the rebuilding of the Democratic Party and send this model around the country. He also had been very effective on fundraising. He raised over $1 million for the state party in Minnesota. He's also one of the highest fundraisers in the whole House, though he himself is not a wealthy individual. So it's even more remarkable. Right. And I was actually very impressed that though he's in Congress, he was willing to leave Congress and work full time on the Democratic Party had he been elected chair. Now, his district is safe, so it would have stayed as a Democratic district because of this effort that Keith has put into it. And as it's turned out, Keith will be a deputy chair, or the deputy chair, and in that capacity will stay in Congress, so he'll both have the congressional leadership and work with Tom Perez, who was elected chair, for deepening the party and expanding that model around the country.
Has Keith helped other members of the Democratic caucus use his model for turning his district solid blue and fundraising already as in his position in the Progressive Caucus?
Yes, he has. In fact, in one of the efforts that the Democratic Party put together so that people could see the debates for chair and for the other officer positions. There are 9 officers of the Democratic National Committee. At the last gathering, their winter meeting in Atlanta, the Ellison campaign put on a set of training sessions called Winning the Ellison Way. And in one of the sessions, which was about this grassroots organizing, there was a presentation working with Democracy for America, one of the many grassroots and online organizations that supported Keith. They talked about 64 elections that they ran using this model, and that's just one set of the examples, but with deep on the ground organizing, supported also by online organizing, and with small dollar donations. So it often can confront big money when there's really popular support, moving on the issues, and building a movement. And there were 64 races in which they were successful.
That's really impressive. That's very impressive. So I'm sure a lot of people across the country are a little confused about the Democratic Party or even the Republican Party structure. And now, my understanding in the Democratic Party, we have the Democratic National Committee, the DNC. We have the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, the DCCC, and the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, the DSCC. These are the, and then of course there's the Democratic Governors Association and the Democratic Legislative DLCC, which is the state legislators. So these are all organizations that sit on top of various aspects of the democratic infrastructure. What's the role of the DNC within that context?
Well, it takes the lead in the sense of it's a national overall organization, but each one has their own governing units and their own separate fundraising. But there are ways you can coordinate efforts because one race is really nested within the others, and a strong party will work on all the operations. I'll give just one example. There was a time when I was the training director of the Democratic Party in the 90s, and we created an extraordinary, and this is an example of what a revived Democratic Party now could do, but it's an example of what was done. There's also some of the relationship between the party committees. We created massive training capacity around the country. Every 6 weeks, we had a training center in a different key state that had between 300 and 550 people at it. And though it was a large gathering, we also had an intimate relationship because there'd be a 1 to 5 relationship or 1 to 10 people of with a facilitator as a core, someone like yourself or myself or others, people from the local areas who would have 5 or 10 participants, depending on the part of the training, who we'd work with on a very intimate basis. One track was for statewide managers, so that might be Senate, governor, attorney general kind of position. One track was for state legislative races. You still needed a manager. Another track for communications directors, field directors, research directors, data directors, and others. And so you had the benefit of people all coming together for a shared message, for a shared overall strategy for winning, and for a relationship of how one, say, a legislative race is nested within a statewide coordinated campaign. But the different committees also focus on their own positions separately. But training can bring them all together, just as one example. So can a stronger party that is committed to not only the federal level and the presidential level, as important as that is, but also to the state level with governorship as legislative level. And one of the concerns we had is there were 1,000 positions that have been lost in the last recent years. And there needs to be a commitment of building the state parties and building from the grassroots up, as well as, in addition to the 5 committees that you mentioned, building with the outside organizations that also have such vitality, whether it's the Fight for 15 or immigration reform or Black Lives Matter or the women's groups, the energy from the Women's March, all of that, for those who are interested in electoral politics, we can bring that all together.
That's it's really fascinating. That most people think, oh, there's just central control over the party, but it is really a very distributed kind of model. Do you see that under Perez and with Keith Ellison as his deputy, that there will be substantive changes at the DNC? Do you have any insight? Because I recall back, when Howard Dean took over the Democratic National Committee chair position after the 2004 election, or during the 2004 election, he was, he focused on a 50-state strategy instead of focusing on the key states to win. It seems that we sort of went back to the old model. Do you see changes in strategy, changes in approaches that we might expect to see in the new regime?
Well, both Tom Perez, who's now chair, and Keith Ellison, who's now deputy chair, will are committed to not only the 50-state strategy, but they talk about a county and a precinct strategy. So digging deep, but providing the resources for the state party to be able to build locally. Now, within that, there will be some states that take on different priorities, particularly when there are key elections going on, governors, the Senate elections, but you need to build the infrastructure so that all parties become vital for the future. That will need financial resources, it will need training, it will need legal support, it will need connection with the outside groups and the inside groups. There'll need to be best practices shared. What's in one state? What works in another state? Are there different models that we need? There's been a new interest in, or a renewed interest in rural and small town organizing. Well, what's really worked on that? Where has it worked? And how can we take those models and spread them nationally? And I do believe that both, that the new leadership at the DNC is committed in this direction. We also,
to what extent is go ahead.
No, you go.
So so in this effort to build out infrastructure in all 50 states, is the DNC focused as part of this on building the bench, recruiting new, younger leadership to run for office at the lower level and start to move them up? I know that the Republicans have been very focused on doing this for quite some time, and it seems that the Democratic Party has lagged over the last several cycles and needs to pick up on that. Is there an explicit commitment from the new DNC leadership to focus on this?
Yes, there was. Now, the exact details are still being worked out, and I'm more familiar with what Keith was saying, and Keith and Tom will develop a joint program, I'm sure. But there was a commitment to there being paid staff, or at least Keith had a commitment for having paid staff for the college Dems, support for the young Dems, and that there'll be a whole millennial approach and perhaps a millennial council. The exact form, I'm sure they'll come up with. This is only a week since the election, and so
well, we saw what Trump did in his first
work out the exact transition. Well, these will be carefully thought out and
yes.
legally viable, and they will not be influenced by Russia or by any foreign power.
Right. Well, thank God for that.
It's also a wish to include the groups that are on the outside and ensure that they can become inside, and the inside groups be more linked with the outside. Just as if you look back here, trying to see where my right and left are mixed up as I'm pointing. But you see behind me, there's a picture behind me.
Yes.
That's a picture of me in Mississippi in 1964 in the Freedom Summer Project. It may be hard to see the picture, but I'm playing the guitar for Fannie Lou Hamer, who was a great heroine of the civil rights movement. And it was at that point that people from the outside were organizing to have an influence on the inside, on the Democratic Party. And today, we see a Democratic Party that's interested in people who've been on the outside, and to create more of an intertwining, some call it intersectionality, but an intertwining across background, race, gender, class, so that we can move forward as a more unified movement.
So it has been said that parties don't create movements, movements rise up and capture parties. We saw that with the Tea Party capturing the Republican Party. We saw that back with the work that you did back in the 60s with the Civil Rights Movement really capturing the Democratic Party. movement that we see emerging now that you mentioned at the beginning of the show, doesn't happen organically completely, although there is a big element of that. There is a lot of organizing that goes on. I wanted to focus in on this because it's become a point of contestation between the Trump administration and his political advisors and what's going on the ground. They've been trying to conflate the idea that activists are being paid to show up to protest in March and that they're being organized. And then they very quickly talk about organization as if it's the same thing as being paid. But from what I'm hearing from you and from my own viewpoint, that's absolutely not true. Organizing activists is the way, it's the First Amendment, right? And even Trump organized people to show up at his rallies and organized people to support his campaign. And I would hope he didn't pay people to vote for him because we all know that that's illegal. But so I want to talk to you about why is organization so important? Why is it a fundamental right for Americans to be able to do that? And why should we just simply reject any idea that's being pushed out that somehow if people are organized to show up at a town hall that somehow makes them, illegitimate?
First of all, the motivation for people to come out now is the motivation of the reality. It's seeing that every day our democracy is being stolen. I just saw a headline from a CNN feed, even while we were talking, that Attorney General Jeff Sessions recuses himself from any current or future investigation into Russian ties. Now, this morning, he was saying, there's no, implying he would not recuse himself. Now he's recused himself. So there's a power of a movement that can make change even under very difficult circumstances. And we now are living in perilous times and difficult circumstances. It is frightening to many people what's happening. And that in itself is providing the motivation for taking action on the variety of issues. And there are all sorts of issues people are mobilizing on. I said, whether it's women's right to decide when or whether to have a child, whether it's the fear of the destruction of native lands, or fear of the destruction of conservation areas and wilderness, or what will happen to our health care? Will the 20 million people now on the ACA, what will happen to them? So that the motive force is put into play, and Trump has put it into play with his minions, with all the people who are working for him. But then what happens is, so all the different efforts want to move. Those who are working on environment or healthcare or Social Security, they all are moving forward. It works better if there's someone to coordinate and to say, let's work together so we're not tripping over each other. We can reinforce each other, because part of the beauty of this moment is there's unity on the broad thrust of what we're looking for, and people are respecting each other. One of the beauties of the Women's March was how peaceful and loving it was. There were almost no incidents. So there's a unity, but to allow the unity to take place, you need some coordination. People also need to know, where do we go? So there also may be coordination to contact police to say, can you ensure there will be security so there aren't incidents? So the organization, sharing of information, the providing of some coordination, sometimes a shared sense of a guidance on direction. And yet, there's also a wide array of approaches that people are taking. There's not a sense of a central control, but there is an outpouring that's very powerful now. And it's at the essence of what is democracy.
Absolutely. So, as you said, you've been an organizer for quite a long time, back to 1964, and you've seen a lot of changes in how organizing is done. And in recent years, there's been not only the rise of digital, but the rise of social media. And Clay Shirky wrote a book a few years back called Organize. Well, the subtitle was Organizing Without Organization. The idea that that these tools allow for grassroots movements to start to self-organize to some degree. I mean, it is still people rising up to take that role, but it isn't necessarily an established organization with an office and a budget and a history that's behind it. To what extent are you seeing in your experiences as an organizer that technology is making it both, number one, easier for the organizations to do the organizing, and two, the self sort of ground up sort of organization that happens through the use of social media giving tools to everybody? How has that complemented the work that traditional organizers have done?
It's, there are many new elements to organizing, and every day we're learning new elements, whether it's hustle or text messaging or new synergies between the new elements. And it's not only made it faster, more accessible. Everyone now can have a podcast, just as an example. You're part of pushing the limits of, in the most positive way, of
Right.
communication, of online organizing, digital organizing, social media. And so I think that there's a way in which it's a democratizing influence itself, and it changes our sense of what we even think is possible. But I also think there are fundamentals to organizing, and they stay as a base. So still, the most effective way to understand people's concerns and to move people for persuasion is still face-to-face connection. So whether it's canvassing or house parties, that's part of the core. But
Right.
when you're in communication, then you can get the message out. If everyone say, take out your cell phone now. Okay, now this is, this is the meme we're going to put out today. Here's our hashtag for our message today. So that the two really are complementary. Now, if they're not seen as complementary, I think there can be limitations to each. So without the face-to-face, I think that there's a deeper level of organization that may not happen when you're building a base of power in a specific geography and you want to win an elected office or you want to pass a piece of legislation. You need to build deep and down in a geographic area. And if you want also to spread that message and involve many different people at many different levels who may not have the time for going to the meeting or being an organizer or being a leader locally in an organization, the online work, social media work is so incredibly effective. We found it in this race for DNC chair. Part of the beauty is we were recruiting volunteers to help us with distributing literature and providing spirit at each of the meetings. Some of the people who came, of course, like yourself, are very experienced. Some of them had never done anything before. And when we asked, well, what organization did you come with? We thought many would have come through the online organization, Move On, Progressive Democrats of America, Democracy for America, and other groups, Our Revolution, many other groups. Many did, but many just said they just came. They saw it on social media. They saw it on Facebook. They were told by a friend. And so there's a magnification that in some ways has less control, but it has such breadth and beauty and diversity in then who comes out. So I really welcome learning from the new technologies, using some of the old and combining both for making progress.
That is incredibly well put, and I love the idea of integrating all the different strategies. I think it is something that we all need to think about doing. I do have just a specific question that always kind of, I understand the importance of face to face, and I understand the value of social media, but we're talking face to face, although mediated through video. And I know you've done a bunch of webinar trainings in the past. How, does that is that a kind of face to face? I mean, obviously it's not shaking hands but is that somewhere a bridge in between the two?
It's an interesting point that you make, and you are a person who does that kind of linking. And so webinars and this kind of podcast is a way to bridge some of that divide, and certainly bridge geography and
Yeah,
bridge where there's such a vast audience. Um, and in addition, we do find that when you're trying for the most persuasive impact, the person to person, the warmth you get when you're with someone over a cup of tea, uh, isn't really substituted with other kinds of connection, but it's a close
yeah,
complement and
yeah.
extremely important. I wouldn't trade one for the other, and our vision of what's even possible is because of the kind of work that you've been doing. Um, now Move On is having phone calls every Sunday night. The first one had 60,000 people on it.
Wow.
The one last Sunday had over 30,000 people on it. And they're going on every Sunday night. And they include both the online efforts and efforts like Indivisible, which also is online, but also local organizations. So they've had people from United We Dream or Black Lives Matter. They had people from the Working Families Party, from People's Action, and Center for Popular Democracy. So it's the combination of those efforts that I think brings us the greatest power with the greatest number, making the greatest moves forward. And it's what we need now.
Well, I think you got it spot on. I just remember a couple of days ago, you and I were on the phone getting ready for the show, prepping for that, and then later that evening we bumped into each other at a reception, and it was just, there's a nice, to be able to see somebody in person. There's, and the serendipity of what can happen in the conversation around you is always a nice addition to what may happen in a confined phone call or a webcast like this, where it's just you and I talking. But so before I let you go, any final thoughts? I'd love to hear, I don't know, your reactions to the speech the other night, your sense of are you hopeful? Are you not hopeful? Where's your mind right now, and how do you see the next few years unfolding?
It's such a time of almost two worlds. Even when a casual person comes up and says, "How are you?" I always want to say, personally, I'm doing great. I'm going to see my grandkids tonight. We just did a good action. Uh, Personally, I'm doing great. But we are living in frightening times. People will be put at risk. They'll lose stability in their life. Families may be ripped apart. My bet is they suffer and that people's lives will suffer. They'll lose health coverage. They'll lose uh, an air that you can breathe. They've just changed the water regulations on some of these streams. And so who knows what pollution then we'll be drinking, eating, smelling, and having to live with. So that it's a harmful time. I also think it is an inspiring time with the numbers that are coming out, with the advances of social media, online, the digital work that you're doing, and the connection between them. So it's both perilous and hopeful. And it is the combination of knowing that we have a vision of where we want to go and a commitment to take action to get us there that I think really will allow us to seize this moment and turn what was a defeat into the potential for enormous victories. I'll end with one quote that's a favorite of mine that's attributed to Dr. King about what we need to do in this time, which is, he had said, vision without action is only a dream. Action without vision is a waste of time. But vision with action can change the world. And I thank you, Alan, for helping to change the world. All of you who are listening, for the work you do to help change the world that I've committed my life to. I look forward to celebrating our victories together.
Well, I really thank you for all the great work you've been doing and for coming on the show, your friendship, and just really been very, very impressed with every conversation I've ever had with you, and look to having many, many more. So enjoy. I understand you're going on an exciting trip soon, and bon voyage.
Thanks so much. And Alan, thank you for the wonderful work you do. Bye-bye.
I appreciate that. Bye-bye. So that was really inspiring. I really want to say very inspiring. I'm going to bring Ben up as we usually do. We have I think Heather's last comments are very interesting. It reminds me of the old Homer Simpson, Lisa Simpson conversation about how, the Chinese only have one word for crisis and opportunity, to which Homer says, crisis-tunity. But indeed, we are at a very perilous moment, but it also is creating enormous energies and synchronicities among people and spurring a very powerful movement in response. And that is very hopeful. What are your thoughts on what you just heard, Ben, before we move into some of the more exciting news items of the week?
Yeah, first of all, it's very, very inspirational, Heather. I was actually perusing, I've known of you, but perusing your history, it's a pretty tremendous and very inspirational activism that's been going on. Very interesting story as well. So very enlightening and very inspirational. And I think the idea of this energy being created is clearly being seen in the streets. I can tell you from an observational view in Philadelphia, there are protests every single day downtown, 200, 300, 400 people. We are looking at big protests, generally anti-hate type protests. As you might know, there was a cemetery desecrated here, which hit close to home. So it's spawned a huge amount of interface and energy, I should say, from all over the world. And we're looking at tremendous support from people from all faiths, including specifically in this case, Muslim faith and Jewish faith coming together to defeat this and stand against it. And I really see this energy, and I know we've talked about it on prior shows. And I think it's an unfounded energy in the sense that this was not expected. Obviously, this type of energy in a certain way, I don't think has been existing out there from the Democratic Party side for many years. And, we realized, and when I say we, I say people, we the people realized that something happened during this election, and that energy is there. It's pretty incredible. It's a very different look when you think about everything that's happening, to know that this cross-border, cross-cultural interface is happening in light of this.
Well, that's a very interesting way to start the conversation, because I wanted to talk with you a little bit about your reactions to the joint address by Donald Trump the other night in Congress. And he opened his speech by taking on the issue of anti-Semitic violence and threats around the country. But I didn't hear from him anything about Islamophobia or the coming together of Jews and Muslims in opposition to this rising hate crimes. What was your reaction? Were you surprised that he opened that way? Did you think he went far enough? Do you, is this one of those situations where, words are nice, but let's see the action that goes with it?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a good question. And obviously, I think, one thing we have to really always remember, and it's something this president, Donald Trump, will always remind us, is that, this is a big show. This is a reality show. I would have been shocked if he would have doubled down, frankly. I had expected him to come in there and look, quote unquote, businesslike. We might wanted him to look presidential, quote unquote, but this is a very businesslike approach to dealing with a problem. And if he had gone into this session, this joint session, I believe with arrogance and hubris, the way he has been running in the last months, I think he thought that it would have been a bad move, a bad a PR move, a bad move for the things he's trying to do. And so what I think is important is to start to drill down on what he said. So, for example, you mentioned him bringing up this situation at the very beginning. I had thought that he was going to address it early on. I think it's simmering too much. I think there's too much backlash against his Jewish daughter and son-in-law, and I feel that he had to step out in front of it, and that's what he did. I don't feel he denounced anything in any way. I don't think he came out there. I think he addressed the subject, told people he had heard it. That's what he said. So I didn't see anything forceful out there that would warrant people to think that he's changing his opinion on this sort of pigeon calling to let this stuff happen in the background in any level. So as somebody who watches this and takes it very serious, I don't see anything that happened there except him trying to move the ball down the line and essentially get it off the radar. And that's what I feel happened with that.
So if I'm hearing you right, and I'm agreeing with what think I'm hearing, that what we heard in the speech was by and large a PR presentation, a measured one, but number one, not necessarily different policy-wise from what he's always been saying. Number two, when he sounds like he was being more conciliatory, it sort of flies in the face with some of the things that he's actually doing in the background. Like, for example, Jeff Sessions, Attorney General, has pulled back on a lot of Justice Department activity protecting civil rights, and has pulled back on actively pursuing those cases. And then, on top of that, we hear, I read several articles which went through all the major points that he made, and almost to a T, he was either misleading or lying about what he was saying. He took credit for the F-35 price coming down when that decision was made on December 19th, more than a month before he was inaugurated. He talked about how 94 million Americans are out of the workforce when the vast majority of those are retired, younger than 16, or out for, decided to stay home to take care of their children instead of working a job. I mean, when you start to deconstruct the things that he said, a lot of it was, BS.
Yeah, I mean, look.
Nicely put, BS.
Yeah, I mean, it's deception. We're talking about the president of the United States here. There's only so many times you can get something wrong, before you have to stand in front of the people and say, I was wrong. I mean, that's the way it's been, at least up until this president. It's very clear that things are very, very different here in terms of how they're approaching, the process to govern. They're trying to stay on message. We're doing exactly what we said in the campaign. Well, that's fantastic, but let's not forget half the country didn't want that to happen. So, at that point, it looks like you are dictating roles. You're playing, with the stroke of a pen. In the case of this president, there isn't Congress. There aren't people involved. It's a faux dictatorship, if I may, on that level, or at least brewing up or bubbling up. So, I mean,
Well,
I don't see
authoritarian tone.
Yeah, of course. I mean, even if that's the minimum of this, to see all these different events and it takes the president so long, and again, it's the cliche, is no problem tweeting about, its daughter's clothing line, which dropped because of lack of sales, but can't get to Twitter to talk about, chronic, uptick in hate crime, anti-Semitism. And let me add this too, speaking of, talk radio that we've mentioned about in a past show. I mean, Rush and the other talk radios out there are simply saying, prove to me there's a hate crime. Where's the hate crime? Where is this? Where's the uptick? Like they're saying, out there to their millions of constituents that it's not happening. So you have this sort of trickle down process, that he'll say this, and you will have, these talk show hosts who are talking to millions and millions of people that will parrot those phrases or those quotes. So, we do have a problem here. And I'm going to be frank with you. Like, I lay that problem at the feet of the media. And the media has got to call this out. They have to be that group doing it. We've had this conversation too. I mean, it's quite clear it's happening, but something's happening where the people out there aren't getting it. So, and we can have a whole different conversation on this, of course, but, really, we have the media, it's got to step into this dialogue in a way that just keeps pounding home. And I know there are plenty of solid reporters and writers, so please, this is not some blanket statement, but, this is for example, and I know we're about to talk about Sessions, Trump's comment was that he probably told the truth. I mean, this is the president of the United States. He did not say, he said, yes, I, trust him fully, but when, peppered further, he used the term probable. Again, this is what I mean by calling them out. That word, that sentence, that response must be repeated by the media to the president over and over again until the president accounts for what he said. And what he said was that the attorney general probably told the truth. So, this is the issue here. I mean, under oath, exactly. And then there's a very fantastic video out there of Sessions drilling Clinton in 1999 for perjury. So we can get into this, as far and deep as we want, but, like really what we're looking at is a chronic level of hypocrisy. And really the irony is that these people are telling us exactly what they think. Trump's quote of saying, he probably told the truth is the point. The fact that he has said this, and this is not what the subject of the discussion is right now, to me is very troubling. And I feel that this is really the media's responsibility. That's the piece of the responsibility that needs, like, why you got to pick these little pieces up. You got to pick them up and put them into the dialogue. Here, let's put the facts out there. So this is what I would like to see. And this is where, I hate to sound cliche, but this is where I think the media is, really not triggering the dialogue that I had hoped they would.
Well, it's always good to hear Benjamin serious and Benjamin frank. So, interestingly that Keith Ellison tweeted earlier today or yesterday that that lying under oath to the Senate is a felony punishable by up to 5 years in prison. And if indeed that's what Jeff Sessions did in his confirmation hearings, not only does it create a conflict of does it hide a conflict of interest with the Russian investigation, but the Attorney General has been caught committing a felony. I mean, just the level of and then Trump comes out on top of this and says, I have full confidence in him. But it's very interesting that you're focusing on probably, that he's parsing his words, that he's setting himself up to backtrack in a way. And interestingly, your comments about the media really strike an interesting tone. Jake Tapper was on the Late Show with Colbert last night, and they talked a little bit about the fact that CNN has been frozen out of asking questions at White House briefings. They were blocked from the White House gaggle, which is an off-camera briefing that they do with Sean Spicer, with the press secretary. And Tapper basically said, look, that doesn't mean we're not doing our jobs. We're out there, CNN is out there digging into the stories. They were all over this Jeff Sessions story today, with great updates, and they're doing real journalism. And it's just, it's really kind of frightening to hear this attack on, they disagree with Trump, and so he calls them fake news.
Well, I mean, again, that's part of the news. I mean, that to me is what I'm saying. Jake Tapper appears on Dom Giordano's a right-wing talk show host here, and Jake peers across the aisle, and I think that's the type of journalism we really need to bring to the table here. And that's what I'm talking about, like about calling them out for what they're saying. Not about like, you're lying. It's more like, all right, here's the information you're putting out. Like, we can stop accusing them of these, of the reality that they're lying or deceiving. And instead, I would report on the facts in question. And this, this gets back to, it's interesting that Heather, brought up the point about taking action. Like, I don't want to sound cliche, but really what we're looking here is journalism that enables the user to take action. And, that would include both points of view in a case like this. It's clear there are certain outlets that are denying that he said this, but, the reality is he's on tape. So, I'm listening to Fox News deny this, and it comes out there as, news, when in fact, maybe they do believe it. Maybe that's the journalism they researched and came up with their story. I mean, I have to give them that. So I don't watch them for that ignorance, any more than I would watch any news agency for not reporting what the actual story is. So, and like we've had discussions before, how we are clearly more informed. This is what we're trying to do out there and stay on top of these things. And I think it is a huge disservice. This Russian thing is something, I've been bringing up for months and months. I had this inner feeling that this was way more than like anything was happening then. The relationship with Russia and the Middle East and Syria goes back for many decades, and bringing this forward to this moment and researching, for example, the dossier that was put out before the election, researching the MI6 agent, put it out, which was immediately discredited in the U.S. Unless I missed something, that agent is a well-respected, decorated, 100% reputable person, that just put out information and facts that any, maybe agency would. Like, I'm just like, where's that story? Where is that? So, I feel like the media chases its tail here. They chase the moment. It's a famous quote, Trump, might be crazy or whatever it is, but he's certainly good for ratings, whatever that famous quote was by.
That was the Les Moonves quote, yes.
There you go. And like here, this is a major news outlet that's not CNN or Fox, essentially saying this is about money. So, it really does bring to the point that, and it's where it drives Trump's point home, frankly. It's where on the veil of it, he looks like he's really on to something. So, I really know at the bottom of that, though, there are plenty, like we mentioned, Jake, obviously being an example, been on shows in the past, like, yeah, there's clearly work to, being done out there, but it's clear like these messages are not being heard. I mean, so something's wrong.
Yeah.
Clearly.
Well, it's interesting that, CNN and others were reporting today. Number one, obviously, we've got Democrats calling for Jeff Sessions to resign because he lied under oath. But now we have Jason Chaffetz, who's the, one of the key chairs doing oversight of the president in the House, and Kevin McCarthy, the House Majority Leader. Both calling for Sessions to recuse himself from the Russian investigation. So, this is not going away, and these are statements that are coming out. Yes?
I'm sorry. Actually, at 4 o'clock session, the Attorney General announced that he would recuse himself. So
right.
I at a press conference that started 4.
But indeed, it was, not only was it Democrats pressuring him to step down, although they were pushing even harder for resignation, but it was key leaders of the House Republican leadership that were calling on him. And Chaffetz in particular, who just a week ago said, when Flynn resigned, said, I'm not going to investigate this, it's working itself out. Well, now he's starting to step in and say, as more information is being exposed. And again, I think it's really important that CNN and the major news outlets are getting this information without having to interview Vice President Pence. I haven't seen Kellyanne Conway on TV for quite some time. In fact, they've been rolling out new faces to speak on behalf of the president in the White House. And at this stage of the game, we still have Sean Spicer out there, lying on behalf of Trump on a lot of situations and just saying some really indefensible things. I'm becoming a little more sympathetic to his plight, but I know that he has a long history of being sort of really quick to attack. I mean, I got into an argument with him several years ago on Twitter, which caught him in saying something that had a very, very quite the opposite implication of what he really thought he was saying. And
Right.
This is a White House that is, as they try to tighten control over the flow of information to the press is finding other sources of information that are more reputable, and the White House is making themselves appear less reputable in the process. And I think that's I think we're going to see even President George W. Bush came out and said the press is not the enemy of the people. They are very, very, they're essential to the democracy. And I don't know. It feels like this guy's been president for years, and it's been 42 days. Yesterday, I saw a stat that in the first 41 days of his presidency, he has lied to or misled the public 187 times. It's being documented on the Washington Post fact checker has been documenting this.
I mean, look, we've been having this conversation too. I think at the end of the day, what we're looking at here is, we need, in my opinion, we have seen an attack on liberal democracy. I mean, this is, to me, what sort of in a broader sense happened here. You have a deconstruction of the democratic process here, which included this Russian influence, if not directly, was including this Russian influence. And I think what needs to happen here is, in my opinion, what Heather was, essentially dedicated her entire life to doing, is realizing that at any moment you might need to be that activist that you were, 30 years ago. Nobody knew this was coming. Nobody, from the left side. So, I think what I'm seeing here is there's plenty of documentation from independent outlets, organized groups, activist groups that have spawned out of all of this. And we are looking at a mass dissemination of facts that you are discussing across all types of medias. And what we're seeing is nothing. We're seeing nothing change. As a matter of fact, after this joint session discussion, all I saw was the media talking about how presidential this guy was. And I was shocked, that here we are, like all it took was a guy to stand in the back room with his friends and say, all right, let's snowball these people. Let's just not bring up the hate. Let's not talk about the rhetoric. Let's not apologize for maybe creating this anti-Semitic feel out there and enabling this. Let's not do any of that. Let's just go right away, cut it off at the head. So by the end of this discussion, we're talking about something else during the news clips. And what we're talking about? What a nice guy and what a pivot this guy made. So I'll tell you right now, I mean, if this guy is simply, this president is simply just changing his tone and suddenly he's as acceptable as he was before, as we're sitting here talking about all these documented deceptions and lies, we're in a whole heap of trouble. If you think about it. So, again, I'm looking, to see like where this is, going to enable, which was the original question here, is create this energy, that's out there. And from our perch right here, we have an outlet that goes out, to however many thousands of people. So, we're in a position now to possibly have these discussions and continue it on. Looking for that activist thing, that rally. I'm very curious to see. There's a great article on CNN, and Zucker's talking about, how it's given them the option to be more newsy here, whereas in, a few months ago, they were a chicken noodle news again, like they were 20 years ago. Now, here they are 2 months later, they're all of a sudden, talking about a new approach to news. So, you know, if these groups are ready to take this discussion on and bring it to the table, to the people, that's great. But I really feel
Yeah.
this our concept of liberal democracy is under siege, and I see it coming from a lot of duped. I don't think Trump and his people are sitting in a back room with Putin and his people figuring out how to take down the planet, but you know, they're clearly acting very clueless. And this thing with Sessions to me is shocking. It's shocking to hear. I mean, quite clear this guy, you know, these were big meetings. Like it's shocking that this is happening. The hypocrisy to me is what gets me. It's not the lies itself, it's the constant reinforcement of the hypocrisy. And nothing's changing. If anything, after that joint session, he gained points in the popularity polls out there. So, you know, this is what I mean, again, by the media, you know, not doing its job and, you know, reporting what's up. I mean, it's one thing to report, it's another thing to be an activist. I understand there's a fine line. I do.
Well, really, yeah. I mean, obviously, you and I will come back to this in future shows and elsewhere. I just want to thank you for your insights today, and as always, and as I said, good to see Benjamin serious and frank. And we will talk with you soon. And for the rest of you out there, I just want to say thank you for tuning in to the Dr. DigiPol Show. Hope you come back next week. Hope you come back every week. And now it's time for a bit of head bopping on the way out. So see you next week. Bye-bye.